And now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Jeff Grace, Partner and Chief Marketing Officer with NetEffect.
Thank you, Megan. Good morning, everybody. So, NetEffect, we are an IT service and support company serving businesses all throughout the Las Vegas Valley. So I started NetEffect in 2002. Really, in working with so many small and medium-sized businesses here in Las Vegas, we run into these cybersecurity issues all the time, and increasingly so over the last several years. So this morning we're going to demystify cybercrime. In the spirit of knowledge is power, we find that if people understand what cybercrime is and how it works, they're much less likely to become victims. We're going to talk about how prevalent it is, what a giant, criminal endeavor it is, how common it is, explain what it is, how it works, and then most importantly, we're going to talk about taking action. And the actions that we're recommending is strengthening your defenses, avoiding downloading malware and being taken advantage of, and then lastly, I'm going to show you how to create and remember strong passwords. So here's really the Cliff's Notes of cybercrime. It is a complex, well-organized criminal endeavor with many, many participants. It is a profession, a criminal profession, but everybody has their area of expertise. So for instance, in the longer version of this presentation, we show a real brief video where you have a woman who her job is simply to get the payload into a company to get the maximum number of clicks. She buys the ransomware from another criminal organization on the dark web, right? So just like any other profession, everybody has their area of expertise. Cybercrime is no different. The cost of cybercrime is expected to reach $6 trillion by 2021. And in 2016, over 2 billion records were stolen. Secondly, cybercrime is committed offshore or via something called onion routing. I can, if I'm a cyber criminal, make it appear that I'm coming from any place in the world. With onion routing, and it's really easy, you can Google onion routing. There are what's called Tor browsers that you can use to leverage onion routing. Essentially, each node along the way only knows about the preceding node and the node after it. So as it traverses the internet, it's easy to mask where it is that you're coming from. It is all about the money. It is almost never ever personal. People tend to think that somebody's after my data. No, not really. They're really casting a wide net, trying to get as many folks as they can in order to exploit whatever they get or whatever they steal in order to make money. Steal money, I should say. And then lastly, it can happen to you, so take some action. So working in IT every day, these cybersecurity facts for 2018, they still boggle my mind. They're just giant. Here you've got cybercrime damage costs expected to hit $6 trillion by 2021. That would make it more profitable than the entire global trade of all major illegal drugs combined. Cybersecurity spending is expected to reach $1 trillion in 2021. Kind of interesting, $1 trillion in defense and $6 trillion in damage. What we're finding as IT professionals is that we're getting pulled more and more and more into cybersecurity. In the past, when I started in my IT career, it was not at all necessary to be a security specialist, and now any IT person has to be at least a security generalist. The market is only expanding, so by 2022, we're expected to see more and more internet people connected to the internet. So it's a growing market for the cyber criminals. And global ransomware damage costs are expected to exceed $5 billion in 2017, which is a 15 times increase over 2 years. So, how do we respond to this crazy onslaught of cyber threats? So, you can take the very paranoid approach and think that everybody's out to get you, fashion a tinfoil hat, try to look around corners. I tend to take a very different approach, which is the analogy of, if I'm presented with a bear, I don't have to run faster than the bear, I only have to run faster than the guy or girl next to me. So, well, let's talk about that a little bit. So, the way that analogy applies, and I take this approach both with physical and computer security, is take my home, for instance. I have better bolt locks. I don't just use the standard bolt locks. I upgraded them. I have an alarm system, and I have neighbors who care about my home not getting robbed. So that is essentially better than average. Same with computer security. My passwords and my approach to security, it's not crazy excessive, but it's better than average. So, and as you'll see, the average passwords out there in use are really pretty bad. So you're not necessarily trying to outrun a super fast person. You're trying to outrun a really, really slow person because their passwords are so bad. From an IT professional standpoint, this is what IT security looks like. It's an ongoing process. It absolutely has to be approached by employing layers of defense. User awareness is the single best value. As you'll see, about 95% of breaches start with user error. And breaches are impossible to defend against 100%. You can really only mitigate your risk. And here's how you mitigate your risk. You have a good firewall in place. We call that in IT security at the edge. Good endpoint security, antivirus, anti-malware, software, etc. Patching your computers against the latest exploits, user awareness, which I touched on a minute ago. Data backups. Most people these days are familiar with ransomware, and I'll show you a little bit more about that here in a sec. But every time we've had a fully managed client get infected with ransomware, we've been able to restore that data from backup. Some level of intelligent oversight and having good processes. So for instance, when an employee leaves your organization, making sure that IT is notified so that that person's account is disabled. Having a good disaster recovery plan, as well as cyber liability insurance. And it's really, really easy ahead of time to assess your level of risk so that you know where your weak spots are. Every year, Verizon comes out with their data breach investigations report, and this is both kind of sad and good news. So it really comes down to the basics. They find that users are very easily tricked by phishing emails. Phishing email is where you receive an email that is trying to get you to do something, either wire money or click on a link or something like that. And stolen or easily guessable passwords are featured in over 50% of breaches. Goes back to my analogy of you don't have to run faster than bear. If you have better than average passwords, you're going to be better off than most and significantly mitigate your risk. Additionally, the bad guys, the criminals, are after both big and small businesses. So both have to be very alert. And this really underscores the issue in terms of where is the money. So with the Anthem healthcare breach in 2015, 37.5 million records were stolen. Now, if my records were stolen in that breach, because I have good passwords and I employ just some good, sensible security practices, it's not likely that my records would be able to be exploited for profit. However, if only 10%, it's more probably like 30 or 50%, of the people whose records were stolen don't have some good, sensible layers of protection, those records are going to be exploited. So 10% of 37.5 million, that's still a lot. Ransomware. So just so everybody understands the criminally brilliant concept of ransomware, when you get infected, you get a little pop-up, looks like this. It says, uh-oh, you've been infected with the latest variant of so-and-so virus or ransomware. They give you a time-limited amount. They give you a time limit in which you need to pay them, as well as they tell you you need to send us Bitcoin, which is an anonymous currency. So essentially what they've done is they've encrypted your files so that they're completely unusable, and if you pay the ransom, they'll give you the decrypt key. Very, very common these days. And like I said, every time we've had a client infected with ransomware, we've been able to pretty easily and quickly restore their data from backup so they don't have to pay the ransom. As a great and massive example of ransomware, in March of this year, the entire city of Atlanta, the municipality of Atlanta, was held ransom by ransomware. And as employees walked into City Hall, they were handed a printed notice saying, sorry, you can't use your computer until further notice. Now, if my example on the last slide, the ransom was $300, what do you think the ransom would be if you lock up an entire municipality? Okay, a super important concept about cybercrime is something called the dark web. So if we use an iceberg as the analogy, you have the tip of the iceberg, which is about 4% of the entire internet content. That is the World Wide Web that you and I know and love. That's our Netflix and Yahoo and Google and whatever websites that we use. It's only 4% of the entire web. You have the deep web, which is simply documents and information that's not publicly accessible, like government resources, academic information, medical records. That's 90% of the entire web. And then you got the little 6% at the bottom. It's actually bigger than what we know and love as the web. The dark web. It's about 6% of internet content. You need special software in order to access it. It's not hard to find. You can Google, it's called Tor, Tor browser, T-O-R. You can download these things and use them to access the dark web. And this is where I think of it as, it's like Amazon for the bad guys. So if I steal 37.5 million records, I'm going to head over to the dark web and see who I can find to buy it. Again, everyone has their area of expertise. You've got some folks who their job is to steal the information. They'll pass it along to somebody else whose job it is to exploit and steal it. I'll give you a great example is stealing W-2s. Okay? So if you can steal hundreds of W-2s, right, where's the money? I suggest people think like a cyber criminal. The best way to make money on stolen W-2s is to file phony tax returns. So if I have Megan here, who's been paying her taxes dutifully and is right on target to pay the right amount, but a criminal steals her W-2s, they can file a phony tax return and say, hey, gosh, I way overpaid. The IRS owes me $20,000. All right, so now we're going to strengthen our computer's defenses. And we do that simply by employing the layers of defense that we talked about just a few minutes ago. And here, I underscore the point that 95% of all breaches are due to user error. We find that by simply educating our clients, talking with them about cybercrime, what it is, how it works, it mitigates that risk significantly. So here's one of the ways that we can assess risk. We have what we call a cyber threat assessment program. we can put a device on our client's network that simply allows traffic to pass through. And what we'll find is where the holes are, where the major security holes are in their network, so we can address them before it becomes a major issue. We also have coming up in January of 2020 a huge cyber threat, which is Windows 7 and Server 2008 R2 are being retired. When an operating system is retired, the manufacturer, in this case, Microsoft, will no longer issue any updates. So this is a giant looming critical date that we're talking with all of our clients about. So just like when Windows XP reached end of life, the bad guys, the criminals, they were writing malware to go after Windows XP, and I'm sure they're doing it for Windows 7 and Server 2008, and they wait until end of life to release them. With Windows XP, for instance, right after it went end of life was the infamous WannaCry ransomware. It was so rampant and so successful, Microsoft made an exception and released a patch to stop WannaCry from spreading any further. Step 2, don't be tricked into downloading malware. Here you can see I get what looks like a very legitimate email, somebody sending me, sharing a file via OneDrive. It's not difficult to download and copy the logo for OneDrive and put it into a malicious email. But here you can see that if I hover over the button for View Document in OneDrive, it's going to take me to the domain re.tc/something, clearly a malicious site. So you can always hover over the link before clicking on it. You can also, I like to say that if you're not sure, if you get an email saying, hey, there's an issue with your bank or whatever, you can go to that site directly, right? Close the email, go to bankofamerica.com or wherever, whatever the site is, and log in and check it out. So I pay a lot of attention. In fact, I collect phishing emails, and this is my favorite one to date. I tend to be a little bit quick on the mouse clicks, right? Especially if I've had too much coffee, I'm a little click happy. So with this email, for demonstration purposes, I've circled the entire white space in blue. The entire white space is a clickable button. So being a little click happy, I clicked it somewhere in the white space. And being a curious person, I figured, all right, well, let's see where this is going to take me. And it took me to the site on the right-hand side. Looks really good. This is what's called phishing and then spoofing. The email is the phishing. The spoofing is here a spoofed website where a cyber criminal organization, so you can see on the right-hand side, it's not HTTPS, and it's some strange domain that is not related to Microsoft at all. So I asked people in this presentation to think for a moment like a cyber criminal. Where is the best? So if I submit my credentials, my Office 365 credentials into this spoofed site, where's the best value of that information to a cyber criminal? So I don't know what they would do with it, but my pure speculation is that they would, once logged in as me, they could send out all kinds of malicious attachments or phishing emails to all of my contacts, because my contacts would be a lot more likely to click a link or open an attachment if it's coming from me rather than some random person. Why is email such a common attack vector? Simply put, it is very effective. 66% of malware is delivered via an email attachment, and 91% of successful cyber attacks start with a phishing email. Not only is it effective, it's cheap. Fortinet We're a Fortinet partner. We sell a lot of their firewall equipment and other equipment as well. Their report in Q4 of last year, and I'm sure it hasn't changed, if anything it's increased, shows that there were, on average, 192 new unique malware variants created every day. So, pretty tough to defend against. A couple of additional examples of phishing. Here on, let's see the date, March 21st, I just dropped my children off at school. I got a call from our COO, Shelly, saying, hey, did you want to discuss that invoice now or when you get to the office? That, if you look at the from, even though it has my name, it's from admin@mailboxwebmail.com. Yeah, phishing email. Again, if I think like a cyber criminal, I suspect that the criminal is simply trying to initiate a conversation with somebody in my office, and if they reply, again, my speculation is that they're going to try to get them to click on a link or wire money or something like that. Here's another example from our procurement specialist, very smart woman who forwarded this to me and said, hey, check this out, phishing email. And for Apple lovers, here's a phishing attempt where they're trying to capture your Apple ID. Here's another great example of, so this is, I was on the Las Vegas Sun website. I saw the super compelling ads at the bottom. It was something about, see the star, the most amazing pictures from Woodstock, and I clicked on it. Right, I'm on a legitimate site. I figured it was fine. It was not fine. My firewall caught it and kept me from downloading this infected file. All right, so we're on the home stretch, and we're going to talk about passwords. Very, very important. So passwords, they are most often stolen either through an exploit, so there's a weakness or a hole in a piece of software. It's done by, like the example I gave a moment ago, the phishing and spoofing, right? So here's your phishing email, spoofed website, I put in my credentials, they're stolen. The other one that's not commonly understood is brute force. So with brute force, quite simply, a piece of software is written for the purpose of going through combination after combination after combination to finally crack the password. So a very, very important point is that given enough time and computing power, any password, no matter how long or complex, can be cracked. So the critical piece here is to have a complex password that's going to take a really, really long time to compromise. So what makes a password complex is a combination of uppercase, lowercase, numbers, special characters, and for it to be long. So with that in mind, this is a very uncomplex password. This password is getting there. It's a little bit better, but still weak. Needs to be stronger. Needs to be more complex. Here's an example of a really awesome strong password. We take the 4 words, swan, rice, red door. We switch letters to special characters and letters to numbers, and I would argue that that's sort of impossible to remember. Instead, the method that I used for many years to create and remember a strong password is I come up with a word or a sentence that I am very unlikely to forget. In this case, my son Aiden was 3 years old in December. I changed some of the letters to numbers and to special characters, and what I find is, after about 48 hours of having this new password, I say the sentence or the word every time I type it. So after about 48 hours, that password is pretty well stuck in my head. And back to the analogy of the bear, this is who you are competing against. Every year, Splash Data compiles a list of the most commonly stolen passwords, and they're pretty awful. So, and I also have in here the text in orange is comparing 2016 to 2017. So the top two most commonly stolen passwords, the number one, number two, they are the same 2 years in a row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 moved up one slot. QWERTY moved up 2 slots from 2016 to 2017. There are some new ones like Trust No One, Star Wars. Yeah, very simple passwords to compromise. Here's some other great examples of strong passwords. Hotel California, you can change the O to a 0. CA, capitalized abbreviation for California, add on a couple of numbers and a special character. For Monty Python fans, we are the Knights Who Say Ni, right? So it's a matter of coming up with something that is complex, but with an easy method to remember it. There are password strength tools available on the web. This one is from Kaspersky. And remember I said that given enough time and computing power, any password can be cracked? Here you go. We are the Knights Who Say Ni. It's a good, strong password. It would take 4 years using the average computer to crack. So make them strong, keep them private. Don't write it on a Post-it note, stick it on your keyboard. Change your passwords regularly and learn to appreciate this prompt. On our network, we're required to change our password every 45 days to something complex. And yes, it's a bit of a nuisance, but it's there to keep your data safe. The other recommendation that I give to people is to employ a password vault, something like LastPass or Dashlane or RoboForm. And the way that works is pretty simple. So you have a master password. So here, if I've got the password of Hotel California, the complex one that I showed a moment ago, once I log in, and you can take it one step further, we use two-factor authentication. So when I log into LastPass, I receive a prompt on my cell phone that I have to say, yep, that's me logging in. Again, it's a little bit of a nuisance, but it's there to keep my data safe. On the inside of the password vault, I have nearly 200 passwords, everything from Netflix to my mortgage. And if I click launch, it simply takes me to my mortgage website and logs me in with my username and password. Because I only have to remember the master password, what's inside the vault are these crazy long passwords like the one that you see there. Okay? I remember the master password. I have my cell phone with me so I can authenticate with two-factor. But then LastPass is responsible for remembering these giantly long, complicated passwords, which, by the way, if I plug it into a password strength tool, it would take more than 10,000 centuries to crack that sucker. So, by then, not my problem. LastPass also has a browser plugin, so it's really easy to use. If I'm on a website, it will offer me, it will say, hey, I've got a couple of logins that seem to match this site. Would you like me to fill it in? As well as it will generate and fill in a new complex password when I'm prompted to do so. So, lastly, take action, implement what you've learned, right? You don't have to outrun the bear, just the person next to you who has a password of let me in or Star Wars. Report suspicious activity, be just a little bit skeptical, a little bit paranoid. If somebody asks you to email to wire money, you can pick up the phone and say, hey, did you really want me to wire $10,000? Immediately report any missing devices, right? We can remotely, IT can typically wipe the data off your mobile phone. We'll encourage you to change your passwords. And that's it. So, any questions or comments?
I have one, Jeff. So if you had to pick, a lot of people are pretty lazy when it comes to cybersecurity, what is the number one thing that you would recommend if they were only going to do one?
Complex passwords.
Okay.
And probably most easily done through a password vault, right? That makes, so prior to using and what most people do is they'll come up with a password that's not terribly complex and they use it for everything, right? So what we see with, for instance, on the dark web, there are these massive breaches, like in 2015, there was a huge LinkedIn breach. So if you were logging in to LinkedIn with your email address and a password of puppies2, and you were using that same password everywhere else, well, it's for sale on the dark web, right? So they can get your LinkedIn credentials and then log in as you to your banking site anyplace else. So it's really, I would say the first and foremost thing is to find a way to use complex passwords that can't be easily compromised.
Awesome. Thank you. Again, thank you so much, Jeff, for being here and sharing those tips with us. Make sure you guys tune in next week for our Chamber University with the topic of year-end tax planning, where we share tips and strategies about how you can prepare in 2018 to save on taxes due next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Please stand by.